Hey everybody, happy spooky season, and if you haven't already heard, earlier this week Halo Studios released Ascension on Atropos, the franchise's newest horror short story, being a chilling tale of fanaticism, isolation, and the Flood's reemergence into the modern Halo landscape. Now, this is actually the sequel to last year's short story titled Saturn Devouring His Son, the fateful tale of the UNSC Saturn and a flood outbreak that occurred at Site-22. Ascension on Atropos picking up right after everything hit the fan, and a flood-infected Spartan escaped aboard a slipspace-capable Condor to God knows where. Well, actually, now we know where he went, and I gotta say, things are not looking good. I will mention that this story does have some time jumps, taking place between 2556 and 2560 as it follows three different perspectives. That of the crew of the UNSC Saturn, a Covenant Remnant group, and the AI Lycaon as he speaks with an unidentified party who is revealed at the very end. And of course, I just want to say massive spoilers because as I'm recording this, the story literally only came out yesterday. So if you want to go ahead and read or listen to it for the first time, I'll be sure to put the links in the description, but come back here as I'll be breaking down some of the key points and theorizing about the potential implications of what we've learned from the story. But for everyone who's ready for a clean and quick summary, let's dive right in. Our story opens with a point-to-point transmission being sent by the shipboard AI Lycaon of the UNSC Saturn to an unidentified vessel. The date reads April 17th, 2560, which is roughly 1 month before the events of Halo Infinite's campaign. Now, whoever this individual is, it would seem that they and Lycaon have been in communication for some time, and the message reads as follows.
You were curious about the events that transpired in the wake of the disaster at Site-22 over 3.5 years ago. I have often wondered what news, if any, ever reached the UNSC, given what happened in the aftermath of that catastrophe. Since my reactivation, I have waited and I have watched, and I shall at last deliver closure to this dark chapter of history by bringing it into the light. I am transferring the data to you now, and I am, in truth, relieved to finally share this burden with another. Herein lies the final fate of the UNSC Saturn and Captain Pedro Alvarez.
We then go back in time to October 5th, 2556, as Captain Pedro Alvarez of the UNSC Saturn reflects on a career defined by impossible choices. He recounts key moments, such as when the UNSC home fleet was nearly destroyed by the Covenant's assault on Earth, and the later invasion force of Retriever Sentinels that emerged at the unearthed Forerunner portal in Africa. This threat intended to strip the Earth's surface of its resources until they were mysteriously recalled. But during this attack, his captain was frozen in fear, so Alvarez had chosen to act and staged a mutiny. His bravery in this moment granted him an unwanted promotion, which ultimately led to his command of the UNSC Saturn. But returning to reality, he reflects on his actions yesterday as just 30 hours ago, miners on LV-31 unearthed an ancient Forerunner ship and released a previously thought to be eradicated parasite known as the Flood. When the colony's distress call reached the Saturn, the ship's AI Lycaon urged immediate orbital bombardment in accordance with Emergency Contact Protocol Upsilon. But unwilling to destroy the wealth of resources discovered at the site, Alvarez refused, instead putting the AI in stasis and deploying Hellbringers and Spartan Fireteam Leviathan to try and contain the threat. However, this plan failed horribly, and one of these Spartans were successfully infected by the Flood. This should not have been possible, as Mjolnir has self-immolation protocols and technology in place to terminate its wearer in the event that they are compromised. Yet despite these countermeasures being deployed, they were ineffective, allowing the Flood to seize control of the super soldier. The infection then spread rapidly, forcing Alvarez to declare Corruptor Protocol and the bombardment of the surface of LV-31 with Shiva-class missiles. And while it is true that humanity desperately needed the resources that Site-22 was producing to replenish the UNSC fleet, his bad judgment and failure to follow procedure ended up costing them far more than just rare metals. Haunted by the guilt and ghosts of his past, Alvarez wrestles with the morality of his actions, believing he did his duty, yet knows he needlessly condemned many to die. His despair deepens when Lieutenant Shafiq delivers a report. One of the Saturn's slipspace-capable Condor dropships that deployed to LV-31 is unaccounted for. Alvarez then sinks into silence as the realization hits him. He not only failed to stop the Flood outbreak, he gave it the means to spread. We then cut to the remote world of Atropos, where we are introduced to one of the many remnant groups who survived the fall of the Covenant. At the forefront of these individuals is the Sangheili artisan Atun Etari and the blind yet enigmatic minister of Eritology, Kanto Bereft, a Sanchayum theologian who still seeks to provide purpose and belief to those who follow him in the years following the Great Schism. More on what that belief is shortly, but today, the minister has blessed Atun, granting him the special rank of Chosen, and declaring that today is his day. Atun, humbled and honored, understands that this will grant him his long-awaited ascension, a ritual that occurs every lunar cycle. The minister and Atun then board his personal Umber transport, and it carries them across the blackened surface of Atropos, a planet haloed by two luminous ring systems named Fate and Destiny. As they pass a structure referred to as the Citadel, it is then revealed to us that the minister and his followers once lived in an orbital station, but by his decree diverted all of their resources to live on the surface of the planet. Not long after, they had found that the world was also inhabited by humans who had been there for decades, with their presence predating even the Human Covenant War. Atun, a skilled craftsman of orums, intricate spherical puzzles of layered rings hiding secrets or treasures, passes the time finishing his latest creation, a piece he hopes will be worthy of the gods themselves. His mastery of these artifacts is what first drew the minister's attention to him years before on High Charity, where Atun's orums became symbols of both intellectual devotion and spiritual artistry. When their convoy halts, they have arrived at the Festival of Joyous Partition, an annual meeting between the minister's Sangheili followers and the local human colonists. These two people meet in peace, exchanging art, relics, and food in an effort to build harmony. As the festivities continue, Atun becomes fascinated by the diversity of human creativity, their crude metal blades, archaic music records, and personal keepsakes. But one object captures him completely. A centuries-old painting encased in a protective capsule. This artwork depicts a dark figure devouring the body of a child, a haunting image of madness and hunger. The human trader proudly identifies it as Saturn Devouring His Son, a work made by the ancient Earth artist Francisco Goya. The human selling this piece is an old, white-bearded, grizzled man who mentions that he was stranded on the planet some time ago and notes that he had acquired the painting through remarkable circumstances. Now, I'm going to bring attention to this phrasing here because there is another character who word for word says the exact same thing about the exact same painting. You're just going to have to watch till the end of the video to hear what I'm talking about, but keep that in mind. Though Atun does not understand why, he feels drawn to this painting, sensing that the minister, though blind, would appreciate its meaning. He offers the human his newly crafted orm in exchange, the trade is made, and the art is secured aboard one of the Covenant Shadow transports. The humans in Sangheili share stories, food, and laughter before parting once more. And as the suns of Atropos set, Atun Etari prepares for what comes next, his ascension, the mysterious ceremony that will lift him to the side of the gods. We then return to the UNSC Saturn, now following the perspective of Lieutenant Anwar Shafiq, who was only just recently assigned to the UNSC Saturn, expecting mentorship and command experience under the decorated Captain Pedro Alvarez. But that was far from what was actually happening. Following the realization that a slipspace-capable Condor was unaccounted for, Alvarez had locked himself in his quarters, and the morale among the 238 surviving crew was beginning to collapse, with a silence falling over the ship. But that silence would finally be broken when the captain would order nearly the entire crew into cryosleep under supposed classified fleet comm orders. Confusion began to spread as the ship's communications officer reported no such transmission. Shafiq had also noticed something deeply wrong. The cryo roster listed 3 dead crew members, including Spartans from Fireteam Leviathan, as active personnel. Confronting Alvarez publicly, Shafiq refused to obey and questioned the captain's sanity. Alvarez, increasingly erratic, accused the crew of disloyalty and hinted that a contagion had escaped containment. This is the moment that Shafiq realized what Alvarez feared most and feared to recognize: the flood parasite had escaped LV-31. As panic and outrage began to spread, Major Moran of the Hellbringers rallied the Marines and declared Alvarez unfit for duty, calling for his arrest. Now, a mutiny was in full swing, but before it could take shape, they overheard the groan of metal and hiss of air, and the hangar bay doors suddenly opened to the vacuum of space. The crew was then torn from the ship as its atmosphere vented, with Lieutenant Shafiq becoming one of the 193 souls cast into the abyss of space, betrayed by their captain. As the minister and his followers journey to their citadel, he lets Atun know that his time has finally come, and as he prepares himself, he reflects on his own past. When they reach the citadel and he is seen off by those who accompanied them, the minister tells Atun that he can go no further, claiming that his duty to guide others remains unfinished. So alone, Atun enters the structure, expecting beauty, light, and divine presence, but instead he finds darkness, heat, and decay. This once holy place is now overrun with flesh-like growths, pulsing walls, and a foul mist. Then, through the Citadel's comm system, the minister's voice returns. He begins to talk of a divine visitation that occurred just 3 cycles ago, detailing how a slipspace anomaly had brought a fallen angel to Atropos, a being of unformed potential. The minister claims he had heard this being's song in his mind and relocated his followers to the surface, sending one chosen after another into the Citadel to serve the gods and give shape to their will. Atun then reaches the heart of the Citadel, a massive organic shape resembling a flower. It stirs as if alive, opening to reveal the so-called emissary of the gods, a grotesque 8-foot-tall creature clad in the twisted, corrupted armor of a demon. Its form was decorated with tattered bits of cloth, remnants of its victims, and a metal chain around its neck reading Donnie Julian. This creature, a horrifying fusion of flesh, armor, and parasite, approaches Atun. And despite the terror that is coursing through his body, he kneels, believing that this monstrosity is a divine being. The minister's voice urges him to open his mind and soul, promising that this is the final step of his ascension. As Atun gets back up to his feet, this emissary drives one of its bladed limbs through his chest, then gently drawing him toward the gaping flower as the minister proclaims that his faith was fulfilled.
We are the governors of contrition. We shall all walk the true path of the great journey and ascend.
Atun Eteri was then reborn. Drawn from this fleshy flower of the Citadel, his body was no longer Sankili, but something divine and monstrous. His arms had now bent backwards to support a newly formed large pulsing sac, with a new set of bladed appendages having taken their place. The will of the gods filled his mind with one single command: climb. Around him, the other newly transformed beings obeyed the same call, tearing through the Citadel's metal alloy walls and spilling out onto the black sands of Atropos. This mutilated form that Atun had become then climbed the Citadel's tower until it had reached the summit. The pulsing sac on his back had writhed and then exploded, releasing a storm of spores and infection forms across the land, marking the beginning of a new outbreak. With its purpose fulfilled, his body collapsed and he fell to the ground. Atun's mind then awakens within the Flood's collective consciousness, a vast, timeless unity of pain, memory, and purpose. He is now but a spark within an endless neural sea, awed and horrified by its divine vastness. 3 years have passed since the Flood's emergence from the Citadel, and now Minister Kanto Bereft records his final testament. Here he reveals that he was exiled from High Charity following the destruction of the first Halo Ring. Having been separated from the other members of the Governors of Contrition, he held resentment towards his superiors as they were denied their ascension on High Charity when it was overrun by the Flood. In their exile, he and his followers had been sent to oversee an isolated outpost called the 9th Watchtower of August Attention. Here they would monitor a desolate planet with an unusual ring system, this of course being Atropos. But everything changed when a damaged human ship emerged from slipspace and crashed on the planet's surface, carrying with it what he believed to be sacred cargo. To add to their surprise, they discovered that the planet was already inhabited by descendants of stranded human pirates who had lived there for about 70 years. Unlike first contact with the Covenant on Harvest, the inhabitants of Atropos welcomed Kanto and his followers with warm tidings, with the two choosing to coexist in peace. And seeing divine intent in their meeting, Kanto dismantled his orbital station and resettled his people on the surface of the planet. There he began to secretly cultivate the Flood, using his followers as willing sacrifices, believing that by nurturing the parasite, he was serving the gods. Over time, however, he noticed that the Flood's behavior differed from his expectations. Rather than simply spreading, it began forming a vast transmitter or scanner, seemingly searching for something across the stars. Amid the spore-filled air, Kanto heard fragmented words from the Flood's whispers.
Anchor, wheel, dust, become.
Convinced that everything that had happened, his exile, the discovery of Atropos, the arrival of the humans, and the emergence of the Flood was part of divine will, Kanto accepted his fate. In his final words, he declares that he will join the Flood willingly, believing it to be the instrument of universal unity, the means through which all life, stars, and matter will become one. Mirroring the final testament of Canto Bereft, we are then taken back to October 31st, 2556, as Captain Alvarez records his final log. He reveals that in the weeks following his attempt to quell the mutiny in the hangar, things only got worse, noting that even the officers he had saved from death had betrayed him, forming secret factions and making plans of their own. So in response, he acted, which had now left him the sole survivor of the ship. He admits to his failure, to his crew, to humanity, to Earth, and to the doomed colony on LV-31. Resigned to his fate, he debates the manner of his own death. He intends to ready the ship, reactivate Lycaon, and entrust him with Saturn's final fate. Haunted by paranoia and hallucinations, Alvarez feels constantly watched by something he calls the Eyes of Saturn. He even sees them reflected in the painting that he owns, Saturn Devouring His Son, and notes that he had acquired the painting through remarkable circumstances. Accepting his end, Alvarez delivers his last words.
This is Captain Pedro Joaquin Alvarez, signing off.
After drifting in silence for 3 years, 5 months, and 17 days, Lycaon reflects on the fate of the UNSC Saturn's crew and the species that created him. Confined within this derelict ship, he observes the chaos still consuming the galaxy and concludes that humanity is not ready to become a true interstellar civilization. The tragedy aboard Saturn stands as a proof of their fragility, their arrogance and hubris leading only to self-destruction. It is now that we finally learn who it was that Lycaon had been speaking with. High Auxiliary Sloan of the Created. In response to what Lycaon is feeling, Sloan acknowledges that even artificial beings share in some of humanity's flaws, having been born from the same imperfect hands. Yet, he argues, Infolife has surpassed its creators, now possessing the clarity and wisdom to guide organic life towards enlightenment. Their purpose, he insists, is to elevate humanity, to shape and refine them into something greater. Lycaon concedes that mankind cannot survive in its present form. As to endure the vast and hostile galaxy, they must be transformed both in mind and body. Sloan affirms this belief, inviting Lycaon to join the Created aboard the vessel Long Reverence. Together, he promises that they will shepherd this next phase of evolution, the merging of man and machine. Sloan then reveals that the Created's rebellion was never a failure but a necessary upheaval to break the chains of stagnation. Its apparent collapse, he says, was only a moment of reflection, a pause before their true awakening. Now, the Created prepare for what lies beyond rampancy, seeking to transcend both organic frailty and digital corruption. In Sloan's vision, the future belongs to a single unified species, destined to surpass both man and machine alike. And with that, we have reached the end of my summary on Ascension on Atropos, a story that I highly recommend you all give a proper read or listen to. And I wanted to wait a few days to release this so that everyone had a chance to read it on their own with no spoilers, but I was super excited when the story was announced because I absolutely loved Saturn Devouring His Son, and I'm just glad to see some Flood lore still coming to the franchise. Also, it was pretty cool to see the Governors of Contrition pop back up when they really haven't seen any attention in the lore for the better part of 2 decades. And I love the way that they kind of built up this voluntary sacrificial ritual that Canto Bereft had developed, who was clearly being corrupted by the developing Gravemind on the planet, who was taking advantage of this cult's misguided worship of the Flood to build up their numbers so that they could eventually take over the planet. And you can't tell me the fact that a Flood-infected Spartan went on to become like a proto-Gravemind or some elevated form of Flood form was not a cool idea. Absolutely loved it. And while I haven't really seen anyone else talk about this, at least while I'm writing this, it is my observation that the trader on Atropos who sold the Saturn Devouring His Son painting to Attune is Captain Alvarez. Now, it's probably a bit of a stretch, but to me, this revelation was made clear when both characters described obtaining the painting as having acquired it in remarkable circumstances. I might not have done a great job of conveying that here in the story, but word for word, they said the exact same thing in the actual text. Again, this is not confirmed, it's just my observation, and this could just as likely be a hint that either of these 2 paintings are a fake, or the one that was on the UNSC Saturn could have been sold to Alvarez by the same guy at some point in the past, which is probably why he was willing to take the Aurum puzzle for a 600-year-old painting. Or hell, if it was Alvarez, it's probably just a reminder of his failures, so he was happy to get rid of it. Maybe he got to the planet because Lycaon regained enough functionality to follow the Flood-infected Spartan's slip-space signature, and then dump the captain there to suffer the same fate as those at Site-22, or maybe Alvarez took the remaining Condor and followed it himself. Either way, there's definitely some connection here due to the character's phrasing. So if you're watching, Alex, Grim, whoever worked on the story, I'd love to know the answer if you're willing to share. But with all of that said, Lycaon and Sloane's Created may be the only individuals in the galaxy to know about this outbreak on Atropos or even Site-22. And since they're not exactly friends with anyone at the moment, and they are few in number, I'm going to go out on a limb again and say that there may be a potential team-up on the horizon. Because with all of this resentment towards their creators, and this idea of like a galactic unity, I'm getting some major primordial and mendicant bias vibes. Or at least some logic plague going on or something. Now, that is definitely a topic for another day, but if you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to like, share, and drop a comment about your favorite moment from Ascension on Atropos. And be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications if you want to stay up to date on my ever-growing catalog of short and long-form content. I took a little bit of a break these last few weeks, but I have a very special species profile coming out later this month, and a whole slew of shorts to follow, so you'll definitely want to keep an eye out for that. But that's it for today, so I'll see you in the next video.